Welcome to the poetry unit. The first thing we're going to need to do is get a basic understanding of the terms that you will need to know to understand poems well. So let's take some notes on poetry. Poetry is imaginative writing in which language, images, sound, and rhythm combine to make a special effect, picture, story, or emotion. Poetry isn't going to be set up in sentences like prose, things like paragraphs and sentences. It's also not necessarily going to tell a story or rhyme or use a specific rhythm pattern, but it could combine many of those things in order to make that effect, picture, story, or emotion. Figurative language is often used in poetry. Figurative language is speech or writing that's used to create some kind of special effect or meaning. If we have any kind of speech using figures of speech, we're using figurative language, and we're going to see several examples of this as we go through our notes. Speech or writing that, when used, change the way literature or poetry sounds is called a sound device. Some examples are alliteration, which repeat consonant sounds at the beginning of the words, onomatopoeia, words that sound like what they mean, rhyme, and rhythm. Rhythm, of course, being the beat of the music, and rhyme being that scheme that you heard in those nursery rhymes when you were little, cat and scat and green and mean, to help the sound of the poem change. The theme is something that you heard about already in our fiction unit. The theme is the author's message or a belief that the author is trying to convey in his or her poem or in literature. Remember that the theme is greater than a topic and is always going to be a phrase of some sort of lesson that the author would like you to get from reading the poem. The theme often won't be said out loud. It's not going to tell you love is dangerous. It's going to give you examples and let you infer that love is dangerous from what's written in the poem. We'll have more practice about theme later in the unit. The repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words that are close together is called alliteration. For she sells seashells by the seashore, we actually have two instances of alliteration here. Sells, see, and see are one example of our alliteration because they start with the S sound, where she and shells and shore is the second example of alliteration because they start with the sh sound. Keep in mind that it's not the letter that it starts with, but the sound that it starts with. So here we have sh, and here we have s. So that when you're looking at alliteration, you're thinking about sounds. Remember, alliteration is a sound device, so it's going to change how the sound of the poetry comes together. Assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds that are in words that are close together. So instead of looking at the beginnings of words for s and sh and b sounds, we're going to be looking within the words for those a, e, I, o, u, and sometimes y sounds. So the black cat in the alley sat ready to attack. We're going to have a in black and in cat and in alley and in sat and in attack. That's an example of assonance, or the repetition of that short a sound in those words black, cat, alley, sat, and attack. If we're talking about onomatopoeia, we're talking about words whose sound are their meaning. Words like buzz, his, tick-tock, tweet, anything that is there simply to create a sound that doesn't mean anything beyond its sound is an example of onomatopoeia. Probably the hardest one of our figurative languages to spell, but very important to remember. When an object or animal is given human feelings, thoughts, or attitudes, we've got personification. So in our example here, the stars are comforting somebody. Of course, the stars are not animate objects, so they can't comfort someone. That's something that a human would do. So because the stars are given that human quality, it's called personification. First part of personification is person. That's an easy way to remember. If you've got a tree that reaches its branches, you've got personification. If you've got an animal that is speaking or having a human thought or feelings, then we have personification. A hyperbole is an obvious and intentional exaggeration to create some kind of effect, to grab your attention, or to get you to picture something in your mind. For example, that fish was the size of Dallas. There's no way that a fish would actually be the size of the city of Dallas. We're exaggerating to try and let you know how big the fish actually was, how big it was in comparison to a normal size fish. If we're talking about an idiom, we have a phrase or expression that cannot be defined using a dictionary. Idioms are commonly used by native speakers of a language, but they're really puzzling if you don't speak that language natively. So if you grew up speaking Spanish, English idioms might be very hard to learn. We have things like hit the hay, which means go to sleep, and nothing in that phrase actually means the literal dictionary definition of go to sleep. It does have some origin, some place where it came from, but it's not immediately apparent when you read the phrase. So that would be an idiom. Break a leg, and I can tell you all about how this came from the Shakespearean stage later on when we're talking about our plays and our theater unit. But nowhere in this phrase is it actually telling you to do a good job while you're having a performance, but that's what it means. Or hold your horses, meaning slow down, which of course comes from back when you would have to hold on to your horses in order to get your carriage to slow down. But if you didn't speak English, you wouldn't be able to see that and go, oh, that means go to sleep or good luck or slow down. Imagery is language that appeals to your five senses. Most images are visual, they're the TV in your head, but sound, touch, taste, and smell also create imagery. Later on, we'll be writing some photo poems that create images or imagery in the reader's mind. So even though we think of an image as something that's in your head, the TV in your head, imagery can actually appeal to any of your senses. So if you're describing a particularly pleasant smell, that's imagery too. A metaphor is a comparison of two unlike things in which one thing becomes another thing. So the skies were fluffy cotton balls in the sky, or the clouds were fluffy cotton balls in the sky. The clouds become the cotton balls with that word were, that state of being or that linking word were makes the clouds into the cotton balls. We're comparing the clouds to the cotton balls by making one become the other. It creates some kind of effect to help the reader understand a little better the picture, again, that they want in their mind. If we use as, like, resembles, or than, then we're going to have a simile. So we can take the same comparison, the clouds versus the cotton balls, but if we add in that word like, we now have a simile because the clouds aren't becoming the cotton balls, we're comparing them using like. So like, as, resembles, or than will turn into a simile rather than a metaphor. An analogy is a comparison of two or more things that are similar in some ways, but otherwise unalike. So you're looking at the relationship between the words. Light is to dark, as low is to high. The relationship between light and dark is opposite, and the relationship between low and high is opposite. So when you're looking at an analogy, when you're comparing, you're looking at how the words relate to one another. You want the words on this side to relate to each other the same way as the words on this side. The repetition of accented vowel sounds and all the sounds following them in words that are close together in a poem is, of course, that rhyme that we talked about earlier. So if we have mean and screen or crumble and tumble, those words have that accented vowel and all the sounds that go after them, the een in this case and the umble in this case, are repeated, and that makes it a rhyme. Rhymes can be within lines or at the end of lines. We'll talk about that in a minute. Rhymes at the end of lines are called end rhyme. For example, hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock. We've got dock and clock that rhyme, so we have an end rhyme. This is very common and can lead to rhyme scheme. But rhymes within a line of poetry, example, Jack Sprat could eat no fat, his life could eat no lean. We've got sprat and fat are on the same line, but they rhyme, so that would be internal rhyme, rhyme within the line of poetry. If you have a pattern of end rhymes in a poem, we can use a different letter of the alphabet to denote each different rhyme in that poem. So Jill and Hill would be our A rhyme here. Water doesn't rhyme with anything, so it's B all by itself. Down and crown is a new rhyme, so we give it a new letter, C and C. And then B again will be a slant rhyme or a near rhyme. It almost rhymes with water here, and after and water will both get the letter B. So the rhyme scheme of this poem would be AAB, CCB. We'll take these from top to bottom and write them left to right to find our rhyme scheme or our pattern of rhyme. If we have rhythm, we're talking about a musical quality that's produced by the repetition of stressed and unstressed syllables or by the repetition of certain other sound patterns in your poem. Remember, poetry is much about sound, and one of those sound is the beat or the syllables and how they're repeated. Okay, just like music, you have a beat that runs the poem. If we have a pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables in poetry, we'll have meter. Meter is going to refer to how many syllables are on the line and how we accent them. And we'll look a little bit later at something that marks the stressed and unstressed syllables in poetry, or what type of meter you're using. Free verse is poetry without regular meter or rhyme scheme. It sounds like natural speech. It sounds like somebody talking. So you're not necessarily going to have it sound real sing-songy like Jack Sprat could eat no fat. It could just sound like somebody's thoughts. A refrain is repeated sound, word, phrase, line, or group of lines. It's like the chorus of a song. It's the thing that you remember when it comes on the radio and you can sing with every time. We'll write a friend poem later on that will include a refrain. Your stanza is a group of consecutive lines in a poem that form a single unit. You'll have a space before a stanza and a space after a stanza in most cases. It's kind of like a paragraph of poetry where a paragraph is offset by indenting. It's going to help organize the poems into smaller units that make sense in your mind. Or it might help delineate two different areas that have different topics or different focuses. In a lyric poem, you'll have a poem that expresses personal feelings or thought. It's not going to tell a story. It's going to be short and musical in most cases. Much of the poetry that's written in modern times is lyric poetry. If you do have a poem that's telling a story, that's our narrative poem. Just like narrative writing in any other case would tell a story, a narrative poem will also tell a story. It will have a narrator, a person who is telling the story. That narrator, just like in a written story in prose, can be for second or third person. And that's the basics that you need to know in order to understand figurative language for our poetry unit.